I was so nervous before walking into that building that I sat in my car for 15 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, telling myself I could do this. It was just another job interview. Receptionist at a small architectural firm downtown. Nothing special. Nothing that should matter more than any other day in my life. But I needed this job. My rent was due in 2 weeks, and my savings account had dwindled to a number that made my stomach twist every time I checked my phone. The office was on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. I remember thinking it was beautiful, the kind of place I'd want to work. I checked myself in the bathroom mirror, hair neat, makeup subtle, professional. I looked like I belonged there. I felt like I didn't. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, smiled and told me Mr. Harrison would be right with me. She offered me coffee. I said yes to something to do with my hands, something to make me look occupied and calm when really my heart was hammering against my ribs. That's when I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps coming down the hallway. I turned toward the sound, coffee cup halfway to my lips, and I saw him. Tall, maybe early 50s, with dark hair touched by gray at the temples. He was wearing a tailored navy suit, and his face was, I don't know how to describe it, tired, like someone who hadn't slept properly in years, like someone carrying a weight that had worn grooves into his features. He looked at me, and then he stopped moving entirely. His mouth opened, closed. His face went pale, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had drained the blood from his body. The coffee cup he was holding slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Neither of us moved. "You," he whispered. I thought he was having a medical emergency. I stood up, genuinely concerned, about to ask if he was okay, when he took a step toward me and his voice cracked like breaking glass. "Where have you been?" I didn't understand. I told him I wasn't sure what he meant, that I thought he was Mr. Harrison, that I was here for the receptionist position. My voice sounded small, uncertain, like I'd done something wrong just by existing in that moment. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, not threateningly, but desperately, like he was reaching across a chasm, and his hand trembled as he said my name. Except it wasn't my name. "Sarah," he said. "Sarah, baby, where the hell have you been?" The room tilted. I stepped backward. I told him again that my name wasn't Sarah, that there was obviously some kind of mistake, that I should probably leave. But something in his face stopped me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't delusion. It was something closer to anguish, a raw, open wound that had just been torn wide open. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, they were wet. "I'm sorry," he said. God, I'm sorry, you just look so much like..." "You..." He couldn't finish the sentence. He pressed his fingers to his temples and took a shaky breath. "Come to my office, please. I need to ask you some questions." Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to leave. This man was clearly unstable, clearly going through something, and I had no obligation to stay. But there was something in his voice, a desperation so profound that it almost sounded like drowning, that made me follow him down the hallway instead. His office was sparse. A massive desk, a few photographs on the wall that I couldn't quite make out from where I stood, and windows overlooking the city. He sat down heavily in his chair and gestured for me to sit across from him. I did, perching on the edge of the seat, ready to bolt. "How old are you?" he asked. 28, I said. "Where are you from?" "Originally, Iowa, but I've been here for 5 years. He pressed his palms against his eyes. "Do you remember anything before that? Anything from before you were 23? "Of course I do," I said. "I remember my childhood, my family, everything. Why are you asking me this?" He stood up abruptly and walked to one of the photographs on the wall. He took it down, carefully, reverently, and brought it to me. "This is my wife," he said. "This was taken 7 years ago, 3 years before she disappeared." I looked at the photograph and my entire body went cold. It was me. Not almost me, not similar. It was me. Same face, same eyes, same way I'm tilting my head slightly to the left. Everything. Everything was exactly the same, except this woman was smiling in a way I'd never smiled, like she was completely, wholly happy in a way I wasn't sure existed anymore. "That's not possible," I whispered. "That's what I've been saying to myself for 3 years," Mr. Harrison said. His voice was hollow. "Every single day. For 1,000 days I've been saying that's not possible." I handed the photograph back to him with shaking hands. I told him this had to be some kind of coincidence, that there were people who looked alike all the time, that this was insane. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I'd never seen another person who looked exactly like me, not even close. "Where did you grow up?" he asked. "Your real childhood. Who was your family?" I hesitated. This was personal. This was territory I didn't usually venture into, especially not with strangers. But something about the way he was looking at me, like I was a ghost, like I was both real and impossible, made me want to answer. "My parents adopted me," I said quietly. "When I was 3. I don't have any memories from before that. My mom always said they didn't have records about where I came from. It was a private adoption. She said the less said about it, the easier it would be for me to move forward." Mr. Harrison's hands were shaking visibly now. "My wife was pregnant," he said. 7 years ago, Sarah was 3 months pregnant. We were going to have a daughter. We already knew. We were so happy. We spent all weekend painting the nursery yellow. She painted the clouds on the wall herself. She was an artist, you know. She was talented in a way that made everything around her more beautiful, just by being in it." He stopped. He sat back down, like the weight of the memory had physically pushed him into the chair. "She went out for groceries one Tuesday afternoon. It was sunny. She texted me a picture of the flowers in the farmer's market. She said she wanted to put some in the nursery to celebrate. And then, nothing. She never came home. The car was found 3 towns over, abandoned on a rural road. No blood, no sign of struggle, just gone. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to exist in that moment. The police investigated," he continued, his voice mechanical now, like he was reciting something he'd memorized a long time ago. "They had theories, abduction, amnesia. She could have been hit by a car, lost her memory, started a new life somewhere. They said she could be anywhere, alive or dead. There was nothing to go on. Just a missing woman and a man waiting for answers that never came." "Mr. Harrison," I said carefully, "I'm sorry about what happened to your wife. I'm genuinely sorry. But I'm not her. I'm not connected to her disappearance. I don't know anything about—" "Your adoptive parents," he interrupted. "Where are they now?" "My mother passed away 5 years ago," I said. "Cancer, my father, we're not in contact anymore. We had a falling out about a year after my mom died." "How old were you when you were adopted?" 3. He was silent for a very long time. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "Sarah was due to give birth on November 3rd. She disappeared exactly 1 month before that, 7 years ago this November." I did the math in my head. The year, the timing, the missing month. Adoption, private, no records. "You think I'm your daughter," I said. "I think," he replied slowly, looking directly into my eyes with an intensity that was almost unbearable, "that you might be the daughter Sarah was carrying when she vanished. I think somehow you survived. And I think I need to know the truth before I go completely insane." And that's when I realized that everything I thought I knew about myself might be a lie. The drive to the adoption agency took 40 minutes. I drove alone. He'd wanted to come with me to walk beside me into this revelation, but I'd refused. I needed to think. I needed to breathe. I needed to process the possibility that the life I'd built on one foundation might actually be built on sand. Mr. Harrison, I couldn't bring myself to call him by his first name, David, had given me the details. The adoption agency had been closed for 5 years, the owners retired, records scattered to different locations. But he had a contact, someone he'd tried to reach 1,000 times over the years, a social worker who'd been involved in the case when Sarah disappeared, someone who might have answers. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The woman's name was Margaret. She was probably in her 70s, with silver hair and glasses on a beaded chain. When I walked into her small office, she looked up and her face went absolutely still. "You're not," she said, standing up from her desk slowly. "I don't know what I am," I replied. I told her everything. About the interview, about the photograph, about Mr. Harrison's theory. I watched her as I spoke, watched the way her hands gripped the edge of her desk, watched the color drain from her face like she was watching a ghost materialize in front of her. "Sit down," she said, and it wasn't a request. I sat. She didn't speak for a long time. She just looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. And then, very carefully, she opened a locked drawer in her filing cabinet and removed a yellow folder. "There was an adoption," she said slowly. 30 years ago. No, I'm sorry. You said you were adopted at 3, that would be 25 years ago. It was flagged in my memory because it was unusual. A private adoption, highly irregular, handled very quietly. The adoptive parents, your parents, they wanted no contact with the birth family. No names, no information, nothing. They just wanted to start fresh with the child. "Why?" I asked. "That was the question I asked at the time," Margaret said. "But the law was different then. Privacy laws were looser. The records showed only that the child, you, had been separated from your biological mother due to circumstances that made immediate adoption necessary." "What circumstances?" She looked at me very carefully. "The file doesn't specify." That was the odd part. Usually there's documentation, abandonment, surrender of parental rights, whatever the case may be. But this one had a note, a handwritten note by a judge, unusual in itself. It said, "For the child's safety and well-being, no further inquiry recommended." My throat went dry. "I tried to follow up on it," Margaret continued. "I was younger then, more idealistic, I guess. Thought something was off. A judge's signature, that specific language. A private adoption that seemed to move through the system almost too smoothly. I made some inquiries, looked into the birth mother's identity. And I leaned forward, and I was told, very firmly, to drop it. By someone with authority. I was a social worker, not a detective. I had other cases, other children. So I let it go. I always wondered about you, though. The little girl in the file. I wondered if you grew up okay, if you were happy. "Do you still have the birth mother's name?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like my own voice. Margaret reached into the folder and removed a single sheet of paper. She held it in her hands for a moment, looking at me like she was trying to memorize my face, and then she slid it across the desk. There was a name written in faded ink. Sarah Catherine Mitchell. Age 22. Listed occupation. Artist. And next to it, a date. The date she'd been admitted to a private facility. Not a hospital, a facility. And beside that, a note. Transferred out of system. Whereabouts unknown. I couldn't breathe. "I think," Margaret said quietly, "that you need to have a very serious conversation with your father, the man you interviewed for today, because I think he's been looking for you, and for your mother, for a very long time." The drive to David's apartment was a blur. I barely remember parking. I barely remember walking up the stairs. I remember him opening the door before I knocked, like he'd been waiting by it, holding his breath for hours. "Tell me," he said. So I did. I told him what Margaret had said, about the sealed records, the judge's note, the facility, about the way the whole thing had been handled with the kind of secrecy that suggested something more than a simple adoption. He stood in the middle of his living room, completely motionless, and then he walked to a closet and pulled out a box. It was enormous, filled with newspaper clippings, photographs, police reports, private investigator notes, everything. Years of searching. He handed me a file with shaking hands. "I hired someone 15 years ago," he said. "A private investigator. He found something. I was going to go to the police with it, but then the trail went cold. And it didn't make sense. None of it made sense." Inside the file was an address and a name. Riverside Psychiatric Care. Closed in 1997, and under that, a list of patients. Sarah Mitchell's name was highlighted in yellow. She was admitted after her disappearance, David said. But it doesn't make sense. Why would she be admitted? Why would she not reach out? It's like she was erased, like someone wanted her gone. Unless she was in danger, I said quietly. Unless she was put there deliberately to keep her away. We looked at each other and something clicked into place. A conspiracy I couldn't yet articulate, a possibility I couldn't yet name. Where is she now? I asked. I don't know, David said. That's where the trail ends. She disappeared from the facility in 1999. After that, nothing. It's like she walked into smoke. I felt something shift inside me. All my life, I'd accepted the story I was told. Abandoned at 3, adopted by a loving family, moved forward, never looked back. But now, as I stood in my biological father's apartment surrounded by evidence of a life stolen and questions that had gone unanswered for 25 years, I realized that my life wasn't a gift. It was a rescue. I'd been taken away from my mother. I'd been separated intentionally, and someone had worked very hard to make sure I never knew why. We have to find her, I said. I've tried, David replied, and the defeat in his voice was unbearable. I've spent thousands of dollars, hired multiple investigators, contacted every hospital and care facility. She's gone. Then we try again, I said. But this time we have me. We have proof that she had me, that I'm real, that I'm evidence that something happened. That might be enough to reopen the case. Over the next 3 weeks, I did something I never thought I'd do. I reopened a case that had been closed for a quarter century. I gave statements to the police. I underwent DNA testing. I spoke with lawyers and investigators and journalists. The story was extraordinary enough that a local news station picked it up. And that's when people came forward. A nurse from the psychiatric facility who remembered my mother. She said Sarah had been admitted as a private patient with no explanation, that she'd been kept sedated most of the time, that she'd asked for her daughter constantly. She said one day Sarah had just been gone. Transferred, they told staff. But transferred where? No one knew. A former administrator at the facility confirmed that there had been improper handling of records, that certain patients' files had been flagged as sensitive. That money had changed hands, that there had been pressure from above to handle certain cases quietly. And then a social media post. A photograph of a woman who looked vaguely like David, with kind eyes and a soft smile, painted in an oil that glowed like it had been made from light itself. The caption read, "My mother. The woman who saved me. Deceased 2004. She taught me to paint before she could speak again." I traced the account, found the woman behind it, a social worker in Vermont who'd been adopted as a child and had recently started looking into her own past. She'd found my mother, Sarah, living under an assumed name in a small cottage by the water. Her mother had been a patient at Riverside. She'd been released suddenly in 1999, traumatized and unable to speak, suffering from what we'd now recognize as severe PTSD. But she'd been alive. She'd been free. And she'd spent the last 5 years of her life being a mother to a girl who wasn't biologically hers, because she understood what it meant to lose everything, and she'd wanted to make sure someone knew they were loved beyond measure. She'd died of cancer in 2004, just like my adoptive mother. The woman in Vermont reached out to me. She told me she'd always wondered about a baby. Her mother had sometimes called out names in her sleep. Sarah, my name. She'd asked once what they meant, and her mother had cried for hours but never explained. I never found proof of exactly what happened to my mother in that facility, or who'd orchestrated the separation. But I found something better. I found that my existence was an act of resistance, that I'd been born into a situation designed to tear me apart, and somehow I'd survived. That I had 2 mothers who'd loved me with an intensity that transcended circumstances and logic, and that my biological father had spent half his life looking for me, not out of obsession, but out of love. I took the job at the architecture firm. David wanted to promote me immediately, but I asked him not to. I wanted to earn my place there by being good at what I did, not by being someone's lost daughter. Slowly, we built something that looked like a family again. Not perfect, scarred by the years of loss, but real. And sometimes, late at night, I paint. Clouds on walls, flowers in gardens. I paint the things my mother left unfinished. I paint the future she never got to see. And I paint it in colors that don't exist in the real world. Colors only a daughter can see when she's standing on the other side of loss, looking back at the people who fought for her, even when she didn't know she was being fought for. The truth wasn't simple, it wasn't redemptive in the way stories usually are, but it was mine. And somehow that was enough.